Hello everybody and welcome along to Clydebridge station. At the end of the February update I alluded to all change on the Pennine. It was certainly out with the old and in with the new with the Quadrant Park nightclub, and it's going to be the same here. You can just see here the two Pennine coaches which currently make up 2/3 of the Pennine train. The coaches are Lima ones that date from the late 80s, and I bought them many years ago on eBay for the previous layout, and so they've been performing sterling service on here. But I have always said that if the opportunity came up to get replacements, then I would take that opportunity. Well, Piccadilly, the Class 08 shunter, has just shunted in the new coaches. You won't be familiar with them, but these are Accurascale MK2Cs. Certainly not familiar with them on Clydebridge station. In this video, I'm going to be telling the story briefly of the Mark II coaches that were made for British Rail. I'll also give you some background to the Pennine services from BR days, plus telling you little tips on how you can model these trains, and then we'll look at the Mark II-Cs from Accurascale in full detail before a short running session at the end. If you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell icon so you can be notified of when new videos appear on this YouTube channel. There's at least one per calendar month. If you've got any comments, queries or suggestions, please leave them in the comments box below. So if you're all ready, all aboard, let's go. The original Mark II stock came out in 1965, and they were fitted with vacuum brakes and dual heating rather than just steam heating. The predecessors, the Mark Is, had been brought out as part of the BR modernisation plan to replace some of the pre-grouping and post-grouping stock. So many LMS, LNER, Southern and West and Great Western coaches were all withdrawn. Some, however, did survive, and it was BR's desire to replace these coaches. Lessons learnt with the Mark I development saw a new body style developed, the Mark II. It differed from the Mark I in that whereas where the Mark I had a full flat coach end, on the Mark II it moved round and it was more rounded. It gave the body a sort of thicker appearance. The dual heating was required because some of the Mark IIs were going to be operating on the West Coast Main Line, which had been electrified initially between Preston, Birmingham, Wolverhampton, Liverpool, Crewe and London, with electrification following to Glasgow in 1974. As per the Mark Is, the Mark II stock initially had windows that had sliding vents at the top, and they also had doors in the centre as well. This allowed for speedier boarding, and the Mark Is had toilets at one end only, a pair of toilets at one end. The Mark IIA stock were built with air brakes, and there was a new compartment design for the first class vehicles. B4 bogies were fitted to all the Mark IIs, and unlike the Mark Is, which were built by a variety of BR workshops and outside contractors, all the Mark IIs were to be built at Lichchurch Lane in Derby, and production carried on right through till 1976. The Mark II-B stock and the Mark II-C stock are very similar in appearance. Now, the Mark II-B stock can be identified from the two Cs. In the two Bs, there's a little vent on the toilet window on the glass itself. On the Mark II-Cs, the vent is actually above the toilet window. That's one thing to notice immediately. This is how you can identify these as Mark II-Cs. The Mark II-B stock also was the first to have large wraparound slam doors. Previously on BR rolling stock, the carriage doors opened inward, towards the coach centre But on the Mark II-B onwards, the carriage doors would open the other way, i.e. towards the coach end. With the wraparound slam doors at either end, this allowed for toilets to be installed on either end, additional luggage racks, and it meant the removal of the centre door. The downside to that, of course, was that there was less doors to get into, so it did possibly lead to slower boarding, but I can't find any evidence to confirm that. The Mark II-Cs were very similar, as I say, to the II-B stock, but they were fitted with twin rows of ceiling lights and ducting for possible future air conditioning. Now, the equipping of that never ever happened. The Mark II-Cs also had key differences in terms of the body, the coach ends, and that the two Cs had red coach ends and the two Bs had green coach ends. When I'm referring to that, I mean these doors here, the gangway doors, which allowed coaches to be coupled together, and these doors would be opened. On the Mark I's, it was a wooden door that was snibbed at one end, and it just got swung open, whereas on the two Bs onward, the Mark II's onwards, there were folding ones that could be folded to either side. It was the coming of the Mark II-D that led to the first ordinary air-conditioned variant, and the FKs, as part of that batch, were the BR's last build of loco-hauled compartment vehicles. The Mark II-Ds also differed in that the windows no longer opened. They were actually fully sealed units, and I'll just take the camera and show you what I mean. There is an example of what I'm meaning there. The Mark II-Ds were built in both corridor form and gangway form, and the Mark II-Ds also had 7 windows as opposed to 8. You can see here how this has got 8. The Mark II-Ds and onwards had 7 windows. One downside of that was that the Mark II-Ds, not all the windows and seats tended to line up in certain configurations. It's very complex, and it's not something that I'll go into here. The Mark II-Es were similarly outshopped, but they had smaller toilets with luggage racks opposite them, and they could be identified by the fact that there was on one side no toilet windows at all. The last variant was the Mark II-F. They had intercity 70 seats and modified air conditioning systems. The Mark II-Fs were also being built at the same time that the production HST Mark IIIs were being built, and in many ways the Mark II-Fs were really previewing the features that were going to be seen in the Mark IIIs. The technical details are too complex to go into here, but the Mark II-Fs were almost a Mark III in a smaller form. The Mark IIIs are much longer than Mark IIs, and they have the doors coming and a shape inwards there to allow for clearance at curves. The Mark IIs also, the Mark II-Fs also saw a wide variety of alterations being made to these coaches so they could actually run them with the Mark 1s and other vehicles, namely the equipping of air brakes once again, and also, interestingly enough, the ability once again to include smaller luggage racks. Mark IIs were very popular coaches, but their lack of luggage space must have been very unpopular on summer Saturday intercity holidaymaker trains. Production of the Mark IIs finally ended in 1976, just as the first intercity 125s were appearing, and a few years later loco-hauled Mark IIIs for use on the West Coast Main Line started to appear. Those loco-hauled Mark IIIs also appeared on the ScotRail Express push-pull system. There were, of course, a few variations made over the years to the Mark II range. These are too much to go into in this video. There's far too much detail, but there's a couple of notable examples that I can tell you about. The most well known of them all was in 1979 when a batch of 13 Mark II F BSOs were converted to DBSOs, from a brake standard open to a driving brake standard open, to help modernise what would become the ScotRail Express service between Edinburgh and Glasgow and Aberdeen and Glasgow, and then from 1985 Aberdeen to Edinburgh. These sets would replace 1971 formed express trains with a Class 27 at either end, 5 Mark II As in TSO form and a BSO. The coaching stock would work in conjunction with a Class 47/7 using BREL push-pull equipment, and in fact these trains would also be designed to run 100 miles per hour. The Mark II DBSOs were clearly obvious with their yellow cab at one end, and in 1984, 9706, one of the DBSOs, was written off after the Pullman accident. 9714 was the new DBSO to replace that, and again that was converted at Derby Church Lane Works, as in fact where all the DBSOs made. A notable absence from the Mark II range were catering vehicles. There had been quite a large range of Mark Is made with catering vehicles which used gas for cooking. The intercity 125s and some Mark III loco-hauled vehicles were equipped with catering. In the early 1980s it was recognised, and this particularly took place with sectorisation, that some medium distance runs might need on-train catering, and the 3 business sectors of BR all actually used what would be termed micro-buffets. The Mark II-Cs were the first ones to get converted into what were called micro-buffets, and what basically happened was that at one end of a coach a seating bay on each side was taken out and it was replaced with a small counter which served a small range of snacks, similar to what you would get on a trolley service on the train. The window on that side would remain, but it would be painted white inside, and it would have the word buffet on it, and on the other side here there would be the word buffet on a board and the red stripe above the window to signify that it was buffet facilities. Now later on, ScotRail decided they would employ some Mark II stock, and again was the Mark II-Ds, and these were actually also equipped with micro buffets too, but they were actually with the buffet branding was actually in a different style, which actually looked very nice with the ScotRail livery. The micro buffets have been part of the Accurascale range, I should add, but they are very popular indeed, so and getting them will be very difficult. A prelude to the coming of what would be known as the Mark II RFBs was done by Intercity on 5 of their micro-buffets in the mid-1980s, and these tended to get used on the overnight sleeper between London, Paddington and Penzance, the night Riviera. What happened was that a second row of seats were taken out, the buffet counter was extended, and a microwave oven and some other electrical cooking equipment was installed. And these were called Intercity Buffet. On both conversions, one of the toilets was taken out and it was converted into a washroom and store for the steward. They were a prelude to the stock that you actually see on this West Coast mainline train I have here. And this was the Intercity RFB, converted at Derby in 1987 and 1988. The vehicles were internally gutted, a new first class seating was put in, and a proper buffet was installed, and two main windows and the toilet window were taken out on one side, and the counter with the microwave oven and other cooking equipment was installed. On the other side, no windows were changed. And that's the thing I've got to mention here again, that there's no change to the window layout on these coaches. The RFBs actually survived for quite a long time. I believe they were last used with the Caledonian Sleeper as lounge vehicles. The Mark IIs were a good exporter as well. The coaches in the Mark II range were exported to New Zealand, Kenya and the Republic of Ireland, and Mark II body shells in multiple unit form were exported to Taiwan. Very few Mark II units were made for the British Rail, however. The Class 310 and the 312 are probably amongst the very few examples. It wasn't really until the coming of the Mark III that the Mark III body shell was used again for multiple units. Now that's the story of the Mark II development. Let's just now have a little moment to consider the service that these coaches here actually ran on. Upon the sectorisation of British Rail in 1982, the Trans-Pennine services, which went from east to west across the Pennines, were the responsibility of the provincial sector, later to become regional railways. The services still used these same coaches with Intercity branding on them, but Provincial in late 1985 decided that they would start to paint a new livery on the trains, and this included new branding as well, Trans-Pennine. The livery was the Provincial Services livery that you can see here, and it was based upon the livery that was being applied to the two prototype Class 150 Sprinters. The Provincial branding of Trans-Pennine didn't mean that they only appeared on the Trans-Pennine. Let me just make that very clear to you. I've seen footage of Trans-Pennine coaches working a local service from Blackpool to Preston in place of a pacer being hauled by a Class 31. But I digress. The Trans-Pennine services were Middlesbrough to Manchester Victoria, Newcastle to Liverpool, Hull to Liverpool, Hull to Holyhead. Over the years, there have been plans to replace the rolling stock, and it was decided that the Class 47 hauled formations would eventually all be replaced by multiple units. Now this started off with the services between Holyhead and Hull being converted to Class 150 operation using two two-car units. The Middlesbrough to Manchester Victoria services went over to Class 156 operation, and these were later extended to Liverpool. And other services were converted over. The last bastion was probably the most famous of them all, the North Trans-Pennine Newcastle to Liverpool services. During 1987, an order was placed by the Provincial Services Department for replacement rolling stock express sprinter units of the Class 158 variety. A total of, in the end, 449 vehicles were ordered, although some of those vehicles, because of a downturn in traffic when built, were actually used by Network South East instead. I believe it was a total of 33 or 36 vehicles were used by Network South East instead as Class 159s. The plan had been that by May 1990 the 158s would enter service on the North Trans-Pennine service, replacing the local hauled formations. But the 158s were heavily delayed. This meant that the original timetable of October 1989 for the conversion of the ScotRail Express to these trains was put well back, and in fact it was July and August 1990 before they were actually converted to Class 158 operation fully. And it was 23rd of January 1991 that the local hauled formations ceased and the Class 158s came into being on the North Trans-Pennine Newcastle to Liverpool route. The Newcastle to Liverpool trains were formed of a Mark 1 BG at the Liverpool end, then working from the Liverpool end of the train to the Newcastle end, there would be a Mark 2 first class corridor, an FK vehicle, and then 5 Mark 2s, either Mark 2A, B or C. In the early days, some blue and grey stock had Trans-Pennine branding on it, but these were very few and far between, and I've never seen one done in 00 gauge form. That's how very few and far between they were. Haulage was normally by a Class 47. These had ousted the Class 45 peaks on these workings from late 1986, early 1987. A plan had been hatched by British Rail that the dedicated locomotives would be used on the service, and these would be painted into a similar livery. And it was thought that the last batch of ETS conversions, 47660 to 5, would all be painted in that livery. That never happened, and it was mainly the generators and then the early production 47/4s that were utilised on the service. That said, 47475 did get repainted into the Trans-Pennine livery in February 1989, surprisingly at Glasgow Works, and it remained allocated to the PTPA pool until it was transferred to the parcels sector in October 1990. There's a good photo that was taken by the late Ian Carr at Chesterley Street in the 3rd of January 1991, showing a Trans-Pennine train being hauled away by 47642 Strathyla and one of the successors on a driver training run. As part of the programme to get passengers ready for the new shorter formations, in mid-1990 one of the coaches was taken out of each formation, so there were now only 6 vehicles long as opposed to 7, sorry. These were actually refurbished and given Regional Railways branding for use on the club trains that would operate out of Manchester Victoria and Liverpool Lime Street to Southport and Blackpool North. Later in 1990, the BGs and the first class vehicle were taken out as well, and a Mark II BSO was put in its place, reducing the formations to 5. One or two of these BSOs carried TransPennine livery, but the majority were in blue and grey. Then the Mark I BGs went to the parcel sector, by the way. The short formations then had mixed liveries, so there would be at least one TransPennine liveried vehicle in the rake of 5. The rest would be blue and grey with either Intercity or ScotRail branding on them. The maximum number of vehicles in TransPennine livery on these short formations was 4. But the minimum was 1. Never would you see a short formation in just blue and grey. Locos cascaded from Scotland were actually used on the TransPennine in its last few weeks, including 47461 and, as already mentioned, 47642. And then it was all over for these vehicles and these trains by the end of the 21st of January. The next day, the 158s took over. And these ran in 2x2 158 formation. 2 cars, by the way, in each unit. So that's how you can model these trains, which ruled the rails for many years on the North TransPennine route. Let's now go and have a look at these coaches in more detail. Now, for the purpose of this exercise, I've also brought in 47475, and that's important for the livery comparisons that I'm going to be making. Well, the first thing to actually say about these coaches is they're the first Accurascale vehicles I've ever owned, and they won't be the last. I can tell you, I'm extremely impressed with them. Very, very impressed indeed. The Lima coaches, which are replacing, were good for their time. They were really amazing, I'm sure, back in 1989 when they first came out, but technology has moved on in 36 years, and these are just stunning. Now, the first thing I'm going to say to you, and this is useful for my non-railway model railway friends, is that they come with a magic wand. Each coach in its box has a magic wand. Now, I'm going to get up and I'm going to turn the light off for a minute so you can see the coach lighting. It comes as standard and it's done by pickups on the wheels, so no decoders need to be fitted. Put the magic wand over the centre of the coach and it turns the light out on a coach. And then you just put it back on. Now, just beware folks, there'll be flashing lights here as they turn it back on. Each coach comes with a magic wand. The livery is absolutely superb. It matches the livery of 47475 only just. There's a very slight difference, but not too much. And it's very similar in appearance to the Regional Railways livery on this Mark II from Bachmann. However, as you can see, there is a slight difference in the livery on the Mark I BG. A friend of mine suggested that could be because this was actually a Mark I BG for regional railways rather than TransPennine. But I have done research, and this was used on TransPennine work right up until 1990. So there is a difference between the Bachmann livery and the Accurascale livery, but if you compare it to that on 47475, I think Accurascale have got it absolutely right. The problem I've got for my layout is that the two coaches have the same number. I don't have the capability to do it, to confidence with my autism, to change numbers. I'll live with them like that. The seating is absolutely superb. I'm actually going to put a link in the description below to a video called Pennine Interlude, and another one called Pennine by Cedar Cam, and both these videos show the interior shots of the Pennine Mark IIs, and you can actually see just how really good they are. The tables are correctly coloured in white, the seats are correctly coloured in blue. What I actually like about this as well, and I don't know if you can quite pick this out, and I'll just get it down there for you, is that the seats themselves have got the correct shape to them too, so they're not just moulded cheap plastic, they have the correct shape to them. Each end of the coach is solid. That's the only really main criticism I would say. It would have been nice to have had some doors to lead out to the gangways, but they've made them solid there. But you're not really going to notice that. I won't be putting passengers in these vehicles, but it should be possible to do so. But I would say, if you are going to attempt that, for goodness sake, please be very careful, because the wires for the pickups to collect the power on the from the wheels are very delicate. I'm going to turn off the power now, because these are fitted with stay alives, and if I just turn this off a minute, again you'll see that this power is still on. That's the power actually off on the layout, and I've got lights still on the coaches, and these will actually be going on for a good few seconds, so you can actually see there that if there was to be a power failure, the lighting would stay on. Now, there's pros and cons to stay alives. David Watson was showing you that recently on a video of his Hornby Class 08 shunter in Intercity Swallow livery, where he actually mentioned that stay alives have an advantage in that they keep the power on to the coach for a few seconds. The disadvantage is with the locomotives, that if you have to suddenly hit the red controller to stop everything in the event of, say, something in their way, the stay alive in the locomotive will ensure power carries on at the locomotive for a few seconds. But in coaching stock, they're tremendous. The roof detail absolutely matches what you would expect from a Mark II, and they don't have the ribs on them, unlike what you can see here on these Hornby ones, which are going to get replaced through time. The Bachmann one here, as you can see, has a smooth roof. Detail, well, plenty of it, too much to talk about, but they have got the bogies superbly detailed, as is all the underframe equipment correct. One thing I've also noticed as well is that they've actually got the correct colour of door in gangway doors. This being a Mark II-C, they were red. The Mark II-B and A, they were green. Bachmann have got that correct there, and Accurascale have got it correct here. The handles at the grab rails on the end of the coach for staff, they're actually modelled better on the Accurascale one here, because they're very small, don't protrude out too much, unlike on the Bachmann one. Other coach end detailing is absolutely correct as well. C1 and all the coach information is there. The buffers are actually able to be changed into ones that are not retracted, a very nice feature. You have to take the buffers out to do that, and different style couplings are also included as well if you so wish to fit them. I won't be doing that. Later this year, the Accurascale Class 60 will be arriving here at Clydebridge Station in coal subsector livery, and it'll be very interesting to compare it to the existing Hornby Class 60 that I have. It'll be great to see what the comparison is between them. These are very, very popular coaches, and they are being snapped up on a regular basis by people. My advice to you is, if you want one, get one now. I'm very pleased with these, and if the opportunity comes up to get another Accurascale coach, I will do, because they're absolutely superb. They're really worth the money. The packaging that they come in is also top notch too. So that's the Accurascale MK2Cs in trans Pennine livery. Have you got them on your layout? Let me know what you think of them in comparison to other vehicles. If you haven't got them on your layout, are you going to consider buying them? Do let me know. Well, there's one last thing to do, and that's actually to get the MK2Cs to come into Clydebridge station on platform number 2 from Manchester Piccadilly and Manchester Airport, to then form a return service to Liverpool Lime Street. And just in case you're wondering, ScotRail 47/7s did actually work on the Trans Pennine in the last 3 days of local hauled operation. This was actually 47704 Dunedin, which was carrying ScotRail livery but was actually allocated to the parcel sector. So what I've done there was actually correct, but then it's your layout, you run what you want. I hope this video has been useful to you. And I have to say right now that Accurascale have done a fantastic job, and I will be sending a copy of this video to Accurascale on their Facebook, and I'll be meeting Accurascale at Model Rail Scotland 2025. I won't be interviewing them on camera, but I will be telling them face to face just how good these coaches really are. Now all we need is Accurascale to bring out a Class 47. There'll be at least one very happy customer, I'm sure. Well, that's all from this video. I hope you've really enjoyed it, and the next video will actually be from Model Rail Scotland 2025. I'll be there on the Saturday, but the video will be live on the Sunday. If you're there and you see me, come over and say hello. It'll be a privilege to meet you. I'll leave you with a view of these Accurascale MK2Cs once again, and I look forward to your company next time. Whatever you're doing, please do take care of yourselves, won't you? And enjoy your lives. I'll see you soon. Cheerio.